Hello everyone, Xeno What If here. Bring in part 9 of What If Sonic and his friends were in Remnant. Link in the description of the fanfiction of this What If. Listen here YouTube. I do not own anything and this is not a scam. End of the line. The Forever Fall Forest, a massive wood lined with red-leafed trees. This was one of the most beautiful parts of Vale, and most of Remnant for that matter. And at this moment, a place of investigation for Team Sonic, RWBY, Dark, and JNPR, along with their guide, Glinda Goodwitch. Currently, Tails piloted the Cyclone through some cloud cover where they had spotted some train tracks that had been built on pedestals that were slightly above the tree line, and sitting behind him were Yang and Blake with Sonic standing at the base of the plane. Alright everyone, we got our eyes set on the train tracks. Sonic said over their comms. We don't see anything yet. Tails was able to get a closer look through the zoom feature in his Miles Electric that was plugged into the Cyclone's controls. These tracks definitely appear to be constructed rather recently, and based on what we've seen with those mutant Grimm at Mountain Glen, I doubt the timing is coincidental. Yeah, and those tracks lead to a shipping dock that also looks like it was built recently. Rouge said as she, Nora, Omega, and Ren were at one end of a fjord with the bat looking through a scope over her right eye that zoomed in at a dock on the other side of the water where she spotted several shipping containers, all of which had a familiar logo on them. We got some SDC shipping containers here too. Looks like we may expect some company soon. This fjord appears to lead out into the ocean. Ren observed looking into the water. If someone is coming, they're not from Vale. Okay. Weiss, Knuckles, Amy and I are at an old temple near you guys. RWBY reported as the four had arrived at a large stone entrance to said temple that was closed off. We can't see what's inside, but it might be big enough for someone to hide out in. Observe with caution. Glinda advised as she, Shadow, John, and Pyrrha walked underneath the train tracks, keeping their weapons on hand as they looked in all directions. If those mutated Grimm were made intentionally, then there is a chance we may find more here. But if they were made intentionally, that means that there is something man-made that can directly affect the Grimm. Tails pointed out. Maybe if we found out what it is and even get a sample, maybe there's a chance we can use it ourselves for an anti-Grimm weapon. Can you really make something like that? Blake asked. Again, if I got a sample of whatever chemical agent Omega detected in the ones we fought before, there is a possibility. But I'm not making any guarantees. Tails answered. I'm still wondering how the heck anybody can build a freaking railroad track out here without anybody noticing. Yang commented. The Forever Fall Forest is rather large, Miss Xiaolong. Glinda said. And it's largely uninhabited. Constructing something and avoiding prying eyes is a possibility here, but it is still concerning. Well, it's already done. Sonic said. Let's see what we can find here and maybe it'll lead us to whoever's involved with Eggman this time around. You still think Eggman might be involved? Even if we haven't seen him? RWBY asked. I wouldn't put it past him. Sonic answered. It's not like him to just drop out of sight so suddenly, especially after that big showdown in the city a little bit ago. Tails' attention was caught by a small ping on his Miles Electric. The screen shifted to a grid-like image of the general area where he spotted a red dot coming from the right side of the screen and coming ever closer. We got movement. The young fox reported. There's something coming from the tracks from the northeast. We're moving in to get a closer look. Report anything you find. Shadow responded. Everyone else, keep your eyes out for anything. We could be wandering into enemy territory. You got it. RWBY signed off. Understood. Rouge signed off as well. Pyrrha felt her hand on one of the metallic pillars that supported the tracks above them. These tracks do appear to be recently constructed. I'd say it was probably done a few days ago. Think you can bring it down with your semblance? John asked. Nothing this sturdy. If I were to focus on one support structure, possibly. But it would take a great deal of effort. Pyrrha answered. It would also result in a great deal of collateral damage. Glinda spoke up. We don't know specifically what is going on, which is why Professor Ozpin has sent us to investigate. If we must take action here, we will. But for now, our job is simply looking for answers, not causing trouble. Yeah, alright. John replied. Of course. Pyrrha nodded. Does Ozpin have any ideas who may be behind this? Shadow questioned the Beacon Professor, getting her attention. We told him that this could be connected to Merlot Industries. Would that give him any leads? A few, but nothing concrete, hence our investigation. Glinda answered. Those Grimm we encountered genetically modified. Shadow began. It shouldn't be possible as the Grimm don't have any form of biology, at least not when compared to animals or humans, and yet we saw it. One of the main fields of research from Merlot Industries was genetics, correct? What do you know of Dr. Merlot? Glinda had the feeling that this was more of an interrogation than an inquiry, but still responded. He was a brilliant scientist with a strong drive to improve our world. Many of his fields of research have gone into studying the creatures of Grimm to better understand them, yes. But he has never done anything direct to them such as mutate as you are likely suggesting. But because of his studies, the Atlas military and council were quick to supply his company with some of the most advanced technology they could provide if it meant finding a possible solution to the Grimm. Until Mountain Glen collapsed, taking the company with it. Pyrrha said with remorse. Yes, many lives were lost, including those who worked at that company. Glinda said with remorse. What about Merlot himself? Was a body ever recovered? Shadow questioned. Do you have proof of his demise? Once again, Glinda felt she was being interrogated, which she didn't like, but still gave an answer. No, there was no body to be recovered. Regardless, it is unlikely that he survived such a disaster. That's only an assumption, Shadow pointed out. Wait, Shadow, are you saying that the guy might be alive? John asked. It is possible, but I have no proof. The ultimate life form replied before turning back to Glinda. Did Merlot Industries have any sort of connection with the White Fang? No, they did not. Glinda answered. Mostly because Merlot Industries had some ties with the Schnee Dust Company, and while they wouldn't openly state it, many in the White Fang and those who are not in the origination do feel that the SDC are anti-Faunus. Well, they're not wrong given what the Faunus go through in those dust mines. John pointed out, which caused him and Pyrrha to think back to Pfeiffer. But if there was a connection between Merlot Industries and the SDC, could whoever's involved here be working alongside Eggman and the White Fang? Pyrrha asked. It would explain what we found with the Lost Dust records. Someone could use that connection to supply the White Fang and Eggman with all that dust. They could, yes. Shadow granted. But these are all theories and assumptions. That said, once more, he directed his gaze towards Glinda. While I understand if neither you or Ozpin have any concrete evidence as to who else may be involved in all of this, you at least have to have a theory or two. And sharing said theories would be most beneficial to all parties involved. The Black Hedgehog and veteran Huntress both gazed hard at one another. Pyrrha and John both felt the situation become quite tense. They knew that Glinda Goodwitch did answer directly to Ozpin and did act as his right hand, and they also suspected that Ozpin was hiding something from all of them. Was Shadow suspecting that Professor Goodwitch was involved in this as well? It made them feel more than a little uncomfortable as the pair of students exchanged glances with one another. However, their attention was caught by the sounds of low growls and branches twitching from the bushes and trees on the left side underneath the tracks. Shadow instinctively grabbed the handle of Arondite, not having it drawn yet, as opposed to John and Pyrrha who both had their respective weapons drawn. Stay calm, students, Glinda advised them, but be ready just in case. She reached for her crop as well, prepared for a fight. There was no other sound made after that, but Shadow did spot a dark opening in the bushes and narrowed his gaze into it. Even at a distance, his own keen eyesight would be able to pick up anything that may move. That's when he spotted a pair of glowing green eyes. Move, he exclaimed as something rushed out from the bushes. He had ran to the right with John following him, while Pyrrha and Glinda rolled towards the left to surround what had emerged from the bushes. It was an Ursa, but it wasn't a normal one. No, this Ursa was twice as tall as a regular one, even dwarfing an Ursa Major as it stood over 30 feet tall. But it also had 4 large arms as opposed to 2, as well as 2 heads. What also stood out about it were the glowing green crystals along its back and its glowing green eyes. We have contact, Shadow reported to the other groups over the comms. A mutant Ursa. More growls were heard around them as 2 more mutant Ursae emerged from the foliage to join the one that had already exited and charged at the 2 pairs. Shadow grabbed John, who gave a slight scream as he used his speed to move closer towards Pyrrha and Glinda. the latter using her telekinesis semblance to create a blast to throw the giant monster over herself and her student to land on the ground, though it was quick to get back up as all four of them regrouped together. Correction. 3 mutant Ursai. Shadow reported over the comms. There are likely others. Stay alert. Yeah, we kinda got one of those too. Sonic replied. A few minutes earlier, some distance away from Shadow's group, the cyclone had managed to catch up to the train that was moving along the newly constructed tracks. The plane was flying particularly close to the top of the train and moving at the same speed. Aren't we getting a bit close for the stealth approach? Yang asked. You'd think, but I added a new feature to the cyclone. Tails explained. I've installed a special light dust projector to act as a form of camouflage. Reconfigured a bit from hard light dust, it bends the light around the cyclone and everyone inside to give the illusion of invisibility. It was true, as from an outsider's perspective, nobody would be able to see the cyclone flying directly over the train. Though if they looked close enough, one could see a slight bend of light almost like a sphere, but only the keenest of eyes would be able to notice something small like that. Tails, have I ever mentioned how awesome you are? Sonic congratulated his buddy. You could stand to mention it more. Tails smirked back. Yang was more than a little impressed herself, but she caught notice of Blake, who appeared to be deep in thought, and shook her by the shoulder. Hey, Blake. That got her attention. You okay? You looked like you zoned out for a second. I'm fine, it's just, this whole thing kinda reminds of something a while back. She replied. Let me guess, an old White Fang job. Sonic assumed. Yeah, my last job. Blake replied, thinking it was best to get this off her chest now. My partner, Adam, and I, we tried to hijack a Schnee Dust Company train like what we're doing. I thought we were only stealing the dust, but he was set on killing the human engineers inside, or at least leaving them to die. So, I left after that. Sonic, Tails, and especially Yang looked towards her in sympathy as they saw the look of regret in her eyes. Hey, if this is too much for you, you can back out. Yang offered. No, Blake stated, trying to steal her resolve. I'm training to be a huntress. I can't back out just because I'm thinking too much about my past. I need to move forward, and that's what I'm going to do, starting now. She looked to all of them with a determined expression. I'm with you guys all the way. That earned an impressed smile from Sonic. Glad to hear it. Let's find out what we're dealing now. Tails. I'm on it. The young fox activated the scanner built into the Miles Electric and tried to get a read on what's inside. I'm not picking up any lifeforms or robot signals. But it's carrying something. There's something large in the car in front of us, and Tails' eyes widened in shock at the readings he got. Uh-oh. What is it? Yang asked. Omega scanned the chemical agent that he found in the mutated Grim back at Mountain Glen to see if we can try and use it to track any more that might be out there, and there's one in here. And it's huge, Tails stated. Right as he said that, the roof of the train car in front of them began to open. A seam appeared down the middle as both sides began to pull apart. Tails was forced to pull up the cyclone and dropped the light dust projector. All four of them looked to see pitch darkness at first from the opening before something huge shot out of it. It was a Nevermore. A mutated Nevermore, to be specific. It wasn't all that much bigger from the Nevermore they faced in the Emerald Forest. But what stood out about it was that it had 4 massive wings along its back, the feathers glowing a bright green along with all of its eyes. Yang, Blake, and Tails looked in genuine horror as it emitted a loud shriek, while Sonic's eyes lowered in annoyance. Oh great. It's the attack of the mutant Tweety. At the same time, Knuckles had used his own strength to lift open the stone door of the old temple from the ground slightly, enough for Amy, RWBY, and Weiss to all climb underneath before Knuckles lifted it up even more to step inside himself and set the door down to be as quiet as possible. However, they would soon find that stealth may not be an option. Mostly because of the roars and howls from all the Beowulfs they found inside. But not just inside the temple, inside the same kind of cages they found in the Emerald Forests. There were several of these advanced containers stacked on top of one another, and each one of them had a Beowulf locked inside. Oh, my gods, Weiss muttered as she, RWBY, Amy, and Knuckles all looked in surprise. They've actually captured Grim. Looks like this temple is being used for storage. Amy guessed. Storage. With Grim, RWBY exclaimed. How in the heck is this even possible? Don't know. Somehow, they managed to pull it off. Knuckles said as they walked deeper into the temple, moving past all the caged Grimm that continued to snarl at them. Though Knuckles paid them little mind while Amy looked with concern, she wasn't all that intimidated. Ruby and Weiss, however, they both exchanged nervous glances with being this close to so many Grimm, and even if they were held within storage containers, it felt like they could break out and attack at any moment. The two partners already had their respective weapons drawn while keeping close to the red echidna and pink hedgehog. They walked down a flight of steps and into the center of the temple, noticing there were many more storage containers, at least 8 total, and each one had contained a mutant Beowulf. Just like those at Mountain Glen, each of them had 3 heads. 3 heads, Weiss said with a pale face. Why did they have to be given 3 heads? They were already unsettling before. You know, there actually is a creature of myth back home called Cerberus. Amy explained. It was a giant dog with 3 heads. Like that robot Eggman used when we first met him. Ruby asked. Exactly. Amy confirmed. Maybe these Grimm were modified using the mythical creature as a reference. Which would mean Eggman is involved in this. Knuckles pointed out. If we have mutated and unmutated Grimm here, it means they're being stored for something. Maybe to be transformed. Maybe, let's call Sonic and see. Amy's suggestion was interrupted as the lights on all the cages turned on, shining a bright red before they opened up. This freed all the Beowulfs that they saw on the way in, as well as all 8 of the 3-headed mutated variety. Acting quick, the quartet formed up with their backs to one another as they were quickly surrounded. They escape, Ruby exclaimed as she held Crescent Rose tightly and Weiss pointed Myrtanaster forward. More likely they were released. Knuckles pointed out as he drew Galentine with Amy holding the Pico Pico. This whole thing was a trap. Sonic, Rouge, Shadow, come in. Amy tried to contact all the other groups. We got Mutant Grimm all over. It's an ambush. Meanwhile, back with Rouge's group, she and everyone else had just gotten all the alerts from Sonic, Shadow, and Amy pretty much all at the same time. Looks like we just walked right into a trap. Nora pointed out before drawing out Monhild in its grenade launcher mode and cocked it. Let's go kill some Grimm. Alert! There is a water-bound vessel incoming from the sea. Omega reported, drawing all their attention. Rouge used her scope to zoom in out on the water to see a ship incoming. She also happened to spot the familiar emblem on the side. It's a Merlot Industries ship. She pointed out. She zoomed in at some of the armed individuals who appeared to be on the deck. We got White Fang on board. White Fang. So Eggman is involved. Ren stated. No Badnik signals detected. Omega reported as they saw the ship pull up on the other side of the water. This is likely an extraction of cargo. And how much do you wanna bet that cargo is Grimm? Nora assumed. Rouge knew they had an opportunity to get a closer look here and they had to take it. She was confident that Shadow and everyone else could handle themselves even against the mutated Grimm. Now it was time for her area of expertise, stealth and espionage. We're going in and we're doing it quietly. Rouge told the group, who nodded in agreement before accessing the comms. Everyone, if you can hear me, we spotted an active Merlot Industries ship coming in for a pickup at our location. It has a few White Fang goons on board. We're going to try and get a closer look. Rouge, out. The minute she signed off, she led Omega, Ren, and Nora down a path that would take them around to the ship on the other side of the water, where they hopefully can find some answers to this little mystery they got going on. John backed away as the mutant Ursa charged at him. Though he brought up his shield to protect himself from the slash of the monster's upper right claw, but the force of it still sent him flying and crashing hard into a metal support beam. Though his aura did protect his body, it still hurt him a great deal. Before the mutant Ursa could advance further, it felt multiple gunshots along its side and turned towards Pyrrha, who had Milo converted into its rifle mode and fired at it. The mutant Ursa charged at her even as she continued to fire. When it got close, she converted Milo into its sword mode as she ducked underneath its upper left claw swipes, while using her shield to block the lower right one and lunged her blade right through it, converting it into its javelin mode to completely pierce through. However, it leaned down to try and bite at her, forcing Pyrrha to release her weapon and use a Koho to block the right jaw. Though the left one did graze her, Her aura protected her, and she slid herself under the mutant Ursa's legs and rolled on the ground before getting back up. She used her polarity semblance on Milo as it was still run through the monster, extending her hand to call her weapon back to her. She looked to see that the wounds she had inflicted upon it, including the hole made from Milo's impalement, heal completely. They can regenerate the same way those at Mountain Glen could. Pyrrha called out to Shadow and Glinda as they continued to fight and hold off their respective mutated foes. Glinda had heard Pyrrha's claim and made a note of it, using her telekinesis to create a brief shield as the second mutant Ursa slashed at her. She then backflipped away to get some distance, making her way towards the foliage. Acting quickly, she aimed her crop at the trees and bushes, breaking them apart with her semblance and spun them all together, creating something akin to a large spear that rotated and mixed all the broken wood together. The mutant Ursa charged at her in breakneck speed, prompting Glinda to thrust all her gathered ammunition at it. The two-headed and four-armed creature took the brunt of the attack. The force of it pushed it back somewhat, though much of its armor and black flesh had been broken off as it was brought down to its hands and knees, with plenty of wood sticking into it. However, the monster was quick to stand back up as all its injuries were quickly healed. Even the wood stuck in it was pushed out by the regenerating flesh, with the damaged armor being repaired the same way. The Beacon Professor and Professional Huntress tisked in annoyance and readied herself for the next assault. Shadow had leapt back and up in the air, performing a homing attack and slashing at the mutant Ursa that he faced before waving his hand to send a trio of chaos spears at it, which pierced and exploded all around the beast. Shadow landed on the ground to see that all the substantial damage that the mutant Ursa had sustained had quickly healed. Even its upper right arm that had been blown off by one of Shadow's attacks had regenerated. This breed is certainly stronger than those we faced at Mountain Glen. Shadow thought to himself. And just as Pyrrha said, it can regenerate, even from severed limbs. However, if it shares the same strengths as those before, it must also have the same weakness. The ultimate life form had Arondite drawn in one hand and waved his finger in his free hand toward himself, telling the mutant Ursa to come to him. The two-headed bear-like monster roared as it charged on all six of its limbs towards Shadow. However, he was more than prepared as he pulled Arondite back and boosted at near light speed, zooming under and past the mutant Ursa, slashing at all four of its hands and both its feet during the charge. He appeared behind the beast as all six of its limbs were severed, causing the beast to fall flat on its belly due to its weight. Using this to his advantage, Shadow quickly teleported above the mutant Ursa, specifically above the neck area of its dual heads, and performed a spin-dash attack with Arondite hanging out and shot downward, slicing at both necks and decapitating the beast completely. Shadow slid a bit on the ground and turned around to watch the mutant Ursa explode. A brief flash of green appeared before it all vanished and melted away. "Don't overpower them. Cut their heads off," Shadow told his allies. Glinda heard Shadow's claim and knew exactly what she had to do. The mutant Ursa rushed her once again, but rather than overpower it as she tried before, she waved her crop to send a wave of her telekinetic power toward its feet and tripped it up. This caused the beast to fall flat on its belly. Acting quickly, Glinda had used her telekinesis to gather up all the debris from before and formed it directly over the mutant Ursa's neck area, shaping it all together into something akin to a guillotine blade, and brought her crop down to bring it down as well and sever both heads in one swoop. She took a few steps back to see the mutant Ursa explode upon its death. John and Pyrrha had gathered together to face the only remaining mutant Ursa as it loomed over them. John tried to think of a way they could cut off both its heads. But its many arms made it hard for them to do so, and then that's when he got an idea. "Pyrrha, can you use her polarity on your shield?" John asked as they backed away to gain some distance from their mutant foe. "As in, if you were to throw it, could you control where it goes and have it come back to you?" "I can," she confirmed. "Then throw it," John told her. "Use it to cut off its arms and legs to bring it down, then we'll go for the heads." Pyrrha saw where John was going and saw that it was a good plan. "All right, stand back." She stepped forward as the mutant Ursa attempted to advance on them. She threw out a koa like a frisbee, and though it flew past the monster, she held out her hand to channel her polarity on her airborne shield and redirected it back to their position. She even used some precision in her semblance to cause the shield to spin. The mutant's right head turned around to give an alarming roar, but it was too late as its upper right arm was severed at the joint, causing it to roar in pain. Hera then directed a koa around herself and John and sent it back to sever the upper left arm at the joint as well. She repeated the process to bring the shield around and sever the lower right arm and then back behind her and John to send it forward and cut off the only remaining arm at the lower left. All this moved at such speed that the mutant Ursa was unable to counter. The final move came as Hera pulled her hand back to call back her shield and towards the back of its legs, severing one and nearly slicing off the other. It wasn't a clean cut at the lower, but it was enough to cause it to tip over and land on its underbelly. "I'll take the right head, you take the left," John told his partner as she called her shield back to her. "You got it." They ran to their respective sides of the downed beast. They raised their respective swords and brought them down. Hera added a bit of polarity to push Milo down further with added strength for a clean cut at the left head. John however had to hack and slash several times to break through the thick neck of the right head until Crocea Morse finally broke through to break the final head off. Both students backed away as they saw the mutant Ursa explode like its brethren. John breathed an audible sigh of relief and almost fell to his knees in mental exhaustion. That was something. It was a great plan. Well done, John. Hera congratulated, causing him to smile. Thanks. He smiled back. And you've learned another lesson. They heard Shadow speak as he approached them, speaking to John specifically. You don't need to overpower your enemy to win. Use your wits, outthink them. You don't need overwhelming power to be strong. John listened to every word Shadow had said and let it all sink in. He still had a long way to go before he could catch up to his more skilled teammates and friends, and he wouldn't stop training. But maybe he doesn't have to be as strong as them. Maybe it isn't about strength against strength but using your wits. Maybe it was time to focus less on his own skills as a warrior and more of those on his teammates and his own as a commander, and use that combination to win. I think I understand, John said with a smile, earning a nod from Shadow. Glinda herself gave a slight smile, proud to see how John has progressed. But more than that, she could tell that their interdimensional visitors were leaving a positive impact on Beacon's students, and it was helping them to grow. And that was something she approved of. At the same time, Young and Blake were standing on the moving train as they fired the long-range offensives of their respective weapons at the mutant Nevermore as it was perched at the front car. But it simply tanked the attacks that had little to no effect on them before blowing all four of its wings to send a powerful gust of wind that would have knocked both of them off, but Sonic was quick to run forward and use his super speed to grab them both. He zipped to the caboose of the train before rushing at the mutant Nevermore, drawing Caliburn before performing a spin dash and multiple slashes with his sword at its front, but the Nevermore brought its lower wings forward to act as a shield and block the attacks. It then raised its upper wings, where Sonic looked in shock to see several of its feathers glowing and had a good idea of what was coming. The blue hedgehog ran backwards as its upper wings shot multiple glowing green feathers at Sonic, zipping and dodging many of them, while using Caliburn to slice and bat away any that he couldn't dodge while on the train. But then, the feathers that had missed him and stuck to the train all exploded, which sent Sonic flying off the train. Sonic. Blake threw out Gamble's shroud connecting to its ribbon, which he was quick to catch. Yang grabbed Blake around the waist as they held tight, and Sonic used the momentum to swing under the bridge and up and over before letting go to land on the train. Woo. Thanks for the save. Sonic smiled. We're even. Blake nodded as she recalled her weapon. Did that thing's feathers just explode? Yang questioned. Yeah. Sonic confirmed. Someone got creative. The mutant Nevermore then felt explosions along its back as the cyclone flew down behind it before flying over as it got close. Tails looked over to see that the damage he had done had already been undone as the four-winged Nevermore's wounds regenerated. The Nevermore type of Grim has always been stronger than the likes of Beowulf's. Tails said to himself. So, of course the mutant version is more durable. This won't be easy. The four-winged Nevermore then took to the skies and flew in pursuit of the cyclone. It flapped its wings to send a series of explosive feathers toward the plane, but Tails was able to spin his plane and avoid them before kicking in the boosters to give an extra boost and gain some distance. Once he was far enough, Tails pulled up to turn the cyclone around and fly straight at the incoming beast. Alright Birdie, let's play a game of chicken. Tails said as he fired a series of lightning blasts from the cyclone while continuing the airborne charge. The mutant Nevermore maneuvered itself to try and avoid most of the blasts, Though it did get skid along the sides and wings, the damage done was minimal at best. The distance is quickly closing between them, just as Tails was hoping for. Right before it looked like they would collide, Tails activated the hard light dust barrier around the cyclone and rammed straight into the Nevermore's face, causing it to spin out of control as its head appeared to be partly crushed. However, it quickly recovered as the damage to the head was repaired and it steadied itself before it fell too far and took to the skies again, flying up and higher than the cyclone to rain down more explosive feathers. Tails gave a startled yelp and scream as he did his best to avoid the feathers, keeping the hard light dust barrier up to tank whatever projectiles would hit, though it shook up the cyclone quite a bit with the shield breaking soon after. Oh man, Tails is in trouble. Sonic winced as he, Blake, and Yang could see the dog fight from the moving train. We gotta help him, Yang stated. How? Our weapons are useless, Blake argued. It's gotta be like the others we saw before, right? Yang reminded. Cut off its head and it'll die. Easier said than done. We can't get that thing to hold still long enough to even get close to its neck. Blake replied. Then we'll go for the wings, first. Bring it down to Earth. Sonic said. I've got a plan. We'll go for a slingshot. Like what you guys did in the Emerald Forest. Are you sure? Blake asked. I'm sure. Sonic confirmed. Alright, let's do it. Yang nodded. Blake then handed one piece of Gamble Shroud towards Yang and they pulled back as far as they could to extend the ribbon as Sonic contacted his friend. Tails, get that thing to fly right at us. Sonic ordered. I'm gonna try and take out some of its wings to bring it down. It might also take down the train so Blake and Yang might need a pickup. Might? Blake questioned, not liking the sound of that. Alright, I'm coming. Tails steered the cyclone straight up toward the sky, prompting the mutant Nevermore to follow. As he flew up, Tails used the plugged-in Miles Electric to track Sonic's current position on the moving train and plot a quick intercept course. Once that was done, Tails cut off the cyclone's engines, causing it to stop its ascent and fall back down towards the mutant Nevermore. He saw it prime another attack with its feathers before he turned the engine back on and shot the cyclone at super speeds past the four-winged Nevermore just as it misfired with its feathers. It was quick to turn around and fly back down and resume its pursuit. I see them coming, Blake stated as her own Faunus eyes caught sight of the cyclone and the pursuing monster. Tails had pulled up and flew straight towards where Sonic would soon be. Tails had timed it just right on his end, now it was up to Sonic. Get ready to jump as soon as I launch. Sonic told the girls before he leapt backwards, his back to the extended ribbon as it came off the train, with Yang and Blake holding as tightly as they could, maintaining their footing. When Sonic felt the ribbon about to snap back, he quickly spun up for a spindish and used that and the resulting thrust of the ribbon's recoil to send him straight towards the incoming enemy. At supersonic speeds, Sonic's launching spindish had zipped past the cyclone as Tails turned at a perfect 90 degrees, leading to Sonic to break through both of the mutant Nevermore's left wings, causing it to derail in the air. Right as he launched, Yang and Blake both jumped as high as they could in the air. Blake used her semblance to create a series of shadow clones for an added boost while Yang fired off Ember Celica for the same effect. Tails had flown forward while both girls were airborne, slowing his speed down perfectly to allow both of them to grab a firm hold of the cyclone's wings and board it. With two of its wings gone, the mutant Nevermore lost control of its flight path and crashed into the train and its tracks, creating a massive derailment as the broken cars of the train and debris from the tracks was sent flying in all directions. This also happened to take place almost directly above Shadow's group as he, Pyrrha, John, and Glinda looked in clear shock to see what had just happened. Acting on protective instinct, Glinda used her telekinesis to push the students and Black Hedgehog out of the way as it appeared the debris was all about to collapse on her. Miss Goodwitch, Pyrrha exclaimed, but Shadow already moved in to try and get her. A train car had fallen and struck Glinda on the side and would have likely broken through her aura and crushed much of her body, but Shadow had already caught up to her. He grabbed the woman and used his speed to jump and kick off the broken car, moving upward as more debris fell. With a firm hold on Glinda, Shadow zipped from each piece of falling debris before making it away from the area and closer towards John and Pyrrha where it was safe, landing on his feet and carrying the woman bridal style, who winced in pain as her right arm and leg both appeared seriously injured. They didn't have much time to dwell on it as the mutant Nevermore emerged from the woods near them, breaking away from some of the debris and trees around it. Its left wings were gone, while its right ones were broken and bent in all the wrong ways, with much debris and trees piercing throughout various parts of its body. But aside from the severed wings, much of the damage to its body was already beginning to heal. There was even some movement at the stubs where the left wings once were, indicating they might grow back given time. However, it felt more explosions along its back as tails flew in with the cyclone once more, Yang and Blake riding behind him, firing fire dust missiles at its back to further distract and damage it, leaving it open for Sonic to come in at the front at his usual speed. One last explosion on its back was powerful enough to push it downward, allowing Sonic to zoom in and leap, drawing Caliburn out to completely cut its head off. He slid past the decapitated mutant Nevermore as it fell and exploded. Sonic would have smiled and made a crack at his victory, but then he caught notice of Shadow holding an injured Glinda, with John and Pyrrha nearby. Urgently, Sonic was already at their side. What happened? He questioned as the cyclone came in for a landing. Once it touched the ground, Blake and Yang had gotten out with Tails right behind him and joined to check in on Glinda. She was caught in the blast. Shadow informed. Her right arm and leg are both broken. He set her down gently, laying her back up against a rock. Her aura held for the most part around her body, but her right side had taken too much damage. Ooh geez. Sonic winced, realizing that he may have had a part to play in that. I'm sorry, I didn't. It wasn't your fault, Glinda said with a wince as she pushed herself up slightly. This sort of thing happens. We'll get you help, Yang said. No. Glinda shook her head. Your friends said that they found a Merlot Industries ship near the water. The White Fang are there too. That's where you need to go. But what about you? We can't just leave you here, John stated. Yes, you can, and you will, Glinda insisted as she used her unbroken hand to pull out her scroll. I'll be fine. I'm a huntress, I can defend myself if there are any more Grimm here. I'll contact Beacon and they can pick me up very soon. But you need to go. Find what's going on, because I believe that ship may be the key to it all. She's right, Shadow said, causing many of the students to look at him in shock. She's not crippled and she's not a helpless citizen who can't defend herself. A pickup shouldn't take long for her. The rest of us still have a job to do. But, Yang was about to protest. Even if Glinda was a professional huntress, the idea of leaving anyone behind put a bad taste in her mouth. However, she felt Blake's hand on her shoulder and looked towards her with partner with a firm yet understanding expression. It'll be fine, Blake said. We need to go. Now. Though none of them liked it, they all knew they had no choice. They still had a mission to complete, and Glinda has years of experience, she could handle herself. They needed to help the rest of their friends and uncover the truth of this mystery. Alright, just make sure you get back, Sonic told her. I will, she nodded. Now go do what you do best, Sonic the Hedgehog. With a nod back, Sonic took charge. Shadow and I will run, everyone else on the plane. Understood. Pyrrha responded as she and Blake perched themselves on the Cyclone's wings while Yang and John piled in behind Tails as he sat at the controls. The second the plane was in the air, Sonic and Shadow both ran at their respective speeds in the direction of the water. Shadow noticed the expression on Sonic's face as they ran. Her injuries were not your fault, he told him. You should know by now that some things are outside your control. I already know that, Sonic replied. I also know that she can handle herself, but I still don't like leaving anyone behind. Neither do I. But it's the best chance we have, Shadow said. She can't help with our mission in the state she's in. It's up to us now. I know, I get it, Sonic responded. But that doesn't mean I have to like it. Sonic had already understood that what happened with Glinda wasn't all his fault. He had no control over that. Accidents happen. And he knew that she would be fine on her own for a few minutes before someone from Beacon came in to pick her up and get her medical attention. But the fact that someone was injured on his watch made him quite frustrated. And that also made him all the more determined to find out who was responsible for all of this and take them down. Knuckles gave a yell as he punched one Beowulf to send it flying and crashing into the wall with enough force that it not only broke through the wall, the Beowulf itself was destroyed upon impact. One mutant Beowulf then attempted to come at him from his sides, but Knuckles gave an upward slice from one of his guillotine blades to slice off its right claw as it tried to slash at him. The red echidna then grabbed the three-headed Beowulf by its leg and used it knock back two other normal Beowulfs that tried to ambush him. He then lifted the mutated Beowulf into the air and slammed it down hard onto the ground on its back. Knuckles then drew both guillotine blades and made an X-slice to cut off all three of its heads and finish it off. Amy brought her Pico down onto the back of one normal Beowulf to crush it and was tackled down by a mutated variety. It tried to snarl at her, but Amy used the pole of her hammer to keep its middle head back, even though the two heads on the side tried to bite and gnaw at her. Amy then pulled back both her feet to kick the mutant Beowulf off her slightly, which gave her some room to pull back the Pico and slam it into the side and knock it over. It quickly got up however and snarled at her, but it didn't get that much farther as RWBY dashed past it with her petal burst and sliced with Crescent Rose's scythe mode to slice off three of its heads in one swoop, killing it. "Thanks RWBY." Amy smiled. "No problem." She smiled back before dashing off to provide aid for Weiss, who was being stalked by two mutant Beowulfs and two normal ones. Rotating the revolver in her blade, Weiss pressed Myrtanaster into the ground to create a large cluster of ice in front of her to break off the lunge of the four Beowulfs. The force of the sudden appearance of the ice cluster did send the two normal Beowulfs back, but the two mutants were able to shatter through and try to rush her. Though Weiss was able to get some distance by conjuring a glyph directly under her to leap away and land on a pile of empty crates. "Weiss," she heard RWBY call to her. "Use a glyph to keep them down. I got their heads." Following her leader and partner's advice, Weiss aimed Myrtanaster to create a large glyph under the two Beowulfs and channeled the gravity dust from her blade directly into the glyph, causing it to turn black as a gravitational force kept the two monsters pinned. They struggled only briefly as RWBY zoomed in and sliced with Crescent Rose. It only took about 4 slashes total before all 6 of the heads rolled off, and the mutants exploded shortly after. "Good call," Weiss said to her. "We know if we cut their heads off, they'll die," RWBY stated. "So rather than waste effort trying to fight them our usual way, let's just try and decapitate them." Weiss smiled at her leader's forward thinking and adaptability. "I'll follow your lead, because here comes another one." She pointed to one three-headed Beowulf that tried to rush them. "Same as before, pin it down," RWBY ordered. Using the same tactic, Weiss aimed Myrtanaster to keep the mutant Beowulf pinned with a glyph infused with gravity dust to halt its charge and keep it still, allowing RWBY to zoom in with her petal burst and slice with Crescent Rose to cut off all 3 of its heads. She zipped past it just before it exploded. With only 3 enemies left, Amy backed away as all 3 of the mutants seemed to focus more on her. They seemed lined almost in a row, and Amy had her hammer at the ready. But when she glanced towards the side to a stone pillar that Knuckles was behind, he gave her a thumbs up. She picked up on his signal and noticed how the Beowulfs were almost directly across from the large pillar. She smirked as she turned to the 3 mutants. "Hey, who wants a treat?" Amy taunted. "Come on, who wants a treat? Come here." One of the 3-headed Beowulfs snarled as all 3 tried to rush her. Fortunately, with his own strength added behind it, Knuckles need only give 2 or 3 punches to break off the foundation of the pillar, causing it to tip over and fall, landing and completely crushing all the mutants, as well as breaking a hole in the wall that would lead them outside. Decapitation or damage their bodies beyond repair, Knuckles said as he dusted his hands. "I'd say this works." The pink hedgehog nodded. "Is that all of them?" "Yes, that's all of them," Weiss answered as she and RWBY approached. Amy felt a buzz on her side and took out her scroll. "Got a message from Tails. Sonic, Shadow, and everyone are on their way to the ship. Glinda got hurt, but Beacon will come to pick her up. Looks like it's up to us now. I think I see the ship," RWBY said as she looked out the hole that was made by the fallen pillar, showing the ship that was only a small distance away. "Let's see if we can meet up with everyone." "All right, but we need to move carefully," Knuckles instructed. "Let's go." With that, all 4 proceeded out the hole and made their way closer to the ship. Meanwhile, the group consisting of Rouge, Nora, Omega, and Ren had already made their way quietly towards the ship. They snuck around and stuck close to a nearby cliffside, doing their best to remain out of sight from any White Fang goons that were overlooking the cargo containers that were being loaded up, many of which were empty. Omega, scan the containers. RWBY instructed. The former badnik did just that and was quick to give his report. There are no weapons. However, I am detecting movement within many of the containers that are now being loaded onto the ship. There are no biosignatures detected however. So they are transporting Grim. Ren's eyes narrowed. I knew it, Nora said in a serious tone of voice. RWBY was quick to access her comms to contact the other groups. That ship we found is transporting Grim. To where? Shadow questioned over the other line. I don't know. We may need to get a closer look. RWBY answered. Hang on, we're on our way. We can back you up. RWBY replied. Wait. Ren halted everyone as he got a good look around the rocks to see several of the White Fang agents were already boarding up. It looks like they're leaving. Omega, can you hear what they're saying? RWBY asked. Affirmative. Omega confirmed. His optics zoomed in on the White Fang grunts as his sensors picked up on their conversations. I just got word. We got huntsmen in the area. They found the storage facility. We're pulling out. All right, you heard them. Load up what we can, we're moving out. They have detected our presence and are preparing to retreat back to their base. Omega told everyone over the comms. Not if we stop them first. Yang responded. Wait, I have an idea. RWBY spoke up. You're sure they're heading back to their base? Affirmative. Omega confirmed once more. Then let's sneak aboard. RWBY said to everyone. If we hitch a ride on their ship, they'll take us right to the center of their little operation. We'll find out who's pulling the strings behind these crazy mutants and maybe even get a lead on Eggman. That sounds incredibly risky and dangerous. Weiss pointed out. But if it gets us a lead on Eggman, isn't it worth it? Blake responded. We don't know for sure if Eggman himself is involved. Pyrrha said. Though, I do agree that this may be the best course of action is to lead us to the one responsible as those mutant Grimm are a clear threat to everyone. And, we have gotten out of riskier situations, right? John replied. Alright, I say we go for it. Sonic was on board with RWBY's plan. Shadow, Tails, Yang, Blake, Pyrrha, John and I should be by the ship in less than a few minutes. Where's everyone else? We're right over the rocks by the shipping containers. RWBY replied. In fact, I can see RWBY and everyone right here. RWBY and her group looked up towards the cliff across from them to see RWBY, Knuckles, Amy, and Weiss had arrived as well, though they quickly ducked behind some rocks from cover to avoid being spotted. How exactly are we going to get on board without being spotted? Weiss asked. Some of those containers look empty. We can hide inside them as they're loaded up. Knuckles pointed out. That sounds like a good idea. Amy agreed. It works. Ren also agreed. I got no problem with it. Nora said as well. It will allow us to infiltrate the enemy stronghold with minimal risk of detection. Omega also said. Alright, let's do it. RWBY said. Did you guys get all that? We got it. Shadow responded. Sonic and I can follow the ship at a distance with our own speed. I hate running on water. Sonic groaned. I have everyone else on board the Cyclone. Tails said. I can activate the light dust projector for camo mode so we can follow from the air. We'll have to go under radio silence until we reach the base. Shadow said. Sounds like we got a plan. RWBY commented. We'll hide in one container, you guys hide in the other. Roger. See you all on the other side. RWBY signed off. Raising her hand and giving a silent signal, RWBY motioned for Omega, Ren, and Nora to follow her. They stuck to the side of one container and spotted a White Fang agent about to close it up. One quick glance towards Omega to quietly ask if it was empty, which he confirmed with a silent nod. RWBY then picked up a pebble from the ground and threw it to the side of the container, creating a loud noise and prompting him to look around the side for the source of the sound. Acting quickly, RWBY, Nora, Omega, and Ren ran past him and made their way into the empty cargo container, which Omega and Nora were quick to close up, only slightly, and left a small opening as they clung to the sides along with their teammates. The agent shrugged at not finding anything and walked back up front to close the container, leaving the four trapped in darkness as per their plan. At the same time, RWBY, Knuckles, Weiss, and Amy quietly slid down a hillside and made a dash towards another empty cargo container while a pair of White Fang agents were distracted by their own conversation. Knuckles, just like what Rouge did, was quick to slightly close the doors to keep his group from being spotted. It worked as those doors were closed up. In a matter of minutes, all the cargo containers were closed shut and loaded up onto the Merlot Industries vessel. Once that was all done, the ship left the port and made its way back to the open water, unaware that the cloaked cyclone was following them. Tails remained in the pilot seat while Blake and Pyrrha held were perched the sides of the wings as John and Yang sat in the back. At the same time, Sonic and Shadow both watched from different positions, one being close to the water, the other on a cliff on the other side of the fjord as they saw the ship sail out and make a considerable amount of distance already. Once it was far out enough to avoid being spotted themselves, yet still close enough to keep from losing sight, the two hedgehogs ran along the surface of the water to follow the ship and hopefully discover the source of this mystery. However, nobody, not even the heroes, were aware that something else had hitched a ride on the ship. Perched on the railing on the top deck of the ship was a single bird. A black feathered raven with red eyes. The ship in question was currently being shown on a large screen within a dark and secluded room in an unknown location. The one watching it was an elderly man with disheveled gray hair, with a matching mustache and beard and prominent eyebrows. He wore a white lab coat that bore the Merlot Industries emblem on its side. But what stood out most about this man was how he had a black robotic right arm with red circuits, as well as a red robotic eye in his left socket with claw-shaped scars around it. They took the bait, Dr. Merlot said with a chuckle. Oh, this will be most entertaining. You seem in rather high spirits. A voice spoke up from the shadows behind him, the individual's physical form currently unseen, but the tone in the voice suggested it was a male. Especially after they made mincemeat over your hard-worked experiments. I'll admit, I was not expecting them to adapt to my mutants so quickly. Merlot granted. But, that just means I have room to improve. And they haven't even seen my greatest experiments, yet. I'm looking forward to see how well this, Sonic the Hedgehog, and his friends fare against them. I suppose it could be an entertaining show. But don't let your guard down, that's why the doc sent me to help you. Speaking of, I know that our esteemed ally, Dr. Eggman, is in contact with someone very special here on Remnant. Someone that Ozpin has been waging a secret war against for a while. Merlot said, turning around on his chair. I've only been told a few basic details, but I am very intrigued to learn more. You wouldn't happen to have any ideas, would you, my friend? No clue. I only know the basics. I've learned not to press too hard on the doc. I'd prefer to stay on his good side and keep my head. Though I do feel I have to ask. Merlot pondered. After seeing the blue hedgehog and his allies defeat my mutants, how exactly do you plan to catch them off guard? This would be your first real encounter with him, correct? The doc gave me a few toys to work with. And like you said, it's my first meet with him. And after observing him for some time, I've learned his one weakness. Friendship. What's more, he brought all those delightful and naive students with him. As the figure slowly began to step out of the shadows, his own figure began to change as well as his voice to sounding something a bit more feminine. What emerged into the light appeared to be Ruby Rose, with the imposter speaking in her exact same tone of voice. Though for a brief moment, right before the eyes changed to look like the silver ones of the real Ruby, the eyes pale white with black sclera. And now is the perfect time to make use of that handicap. Merlot Island. The door to a cargo container had been opened as Rouge peeked outside to see if there was anybody outside to spring an ambush of some kind. It did not appear to be the case as there was nobody outside. She waved her hand to signal those behind her to follow as she stepped outside, followed by Nora, Omega, and Ren, the two students having their weapons handy. Once they stepped outside, the group got a good look at their new environment. It appeared to be on the shore of an island of some sort. There didn't appear to be any form of vegetation, simply a rocky terrain with man-made structures barely seen in the distance. Where are we? Nora asked. It appears to be some sort of island. Omega observed. I don't see the ship we were on. Ren looked out towards the water and didn't see any sign of the vessel they had stowed away on, just the crane that was used to unload their own container. No other shipping containers either. Rouge noted before trying to access the comms. Shadow. Blue. Does anyone read me? All she got on the other end was static. Nora tried to do the same thing with her scroll. Hello. John. Pyrrha. Just like with Rouge, all she got was static, which caused her to look toward Ren with concern. Omega, can you contact any of the others? Rouge asked. Negative. There is some form of radio interference that is jamming all communications. Omega replied. We need to find a way to regroup with the others. Ren deduced. I have suspicion we were separated on purpose. How are we supposed to do that? Nora asked. I can locate the source of the interference. Omega said as he took a brief moment to scan the general area. There appear to be 3 signals. I will attempt to send the coordinates to the others via other forms of communication including Morse code or binary. We should attempt to reach the closest one. Good idea. Where is it? Rouge asked. It appears to be that tower, approximately 2.7 kilometers northeast from our current location. Omega pointed toward a large cellular tower in the distance. Let's get going, Rouge instructed. However, before they had a chance to move deeper into the island, a group of humanoid-shaped robots leapt down from the cliffside on the group's left to block their path. Another group did the same behind them to surround them, making up a total of 10 altogether. These robots all had the same design to them. They had a sleek humanoid build, clad in crimson armor with neon blue highlights across their bodies as well as their eyes. Each of them also wielded a double-ended glaive. We got robots. Nora already had Monhild drawn, as did Ren with Stormflower. Badniks? Ren questioned. Negative. Omega deduced. They do not match any past or current Eggman design. Rouge noticed the emblem of the M at the center of their chests. Merlot Industries. Take M down. She flew upward as the group dispersed with the robots going on the attack. She shot herself down with her heels towards one robot, who blocked it with the staff of its weapon before trying to swing the blades at her, but she had flown over and behind it before driving one of her Purple Heart's blades into the back of its neck to disable it. She landed on her hands and stuck out her feet to block the glaive strikes of 2 robots that came at her from both sides before spinning her feet to kick their weapons back, followed by a leap into the air. She threw out both Purple Hearts to the arm joints of one robot to literally disarm it before shooting herself downward with a powerful double kick to obliterate its chest unit. She picked up the downed glaive from the robot she had just killed and used it to block the strike from the 3rd robot, before pulling the weapon back to bring the robot in closer and deliver a flip kick to its jaw area and knock it back before throwing her glaive like a javelin through its neck to decapitate it as she landed with her usual style and smirk. Ren and Nora came to back as 4 robots surrounded them. Ren fired Stormflower at the 2 he faced, both charged in response and attacked with their glaives, which Ren tried to parry with the blades of his own weapons but found himself on the defensive. Nora likewise tried to swing Monhild's hammer mode at the 2 robots that charged her, but they were quick enough to move backwards and avoid her strikes. She converted Monhild into its grenade launcher mode and fired at one robot. The heavy artillery was enough to completely obliterate it, but it also left her open for the 2nd robot to slice at her with its glaive and knock her down. Nora. Ren broke off his standoff with the 2 robots he was facing and fell backwards to land on his hands and deliver a double kick to the robot that stood over his childhood friend to knock it down, and he proceeded quickly to slice at its neck with Stormflower. Nora also followed through by grabbing one of the robots that Ren had previously faced by the shoulder and slam it onto the ground, momentarily disabling it as she blocked the glaive strike of the other robot with Monhild before punching the robot in the face to knock it down. While it was down, Nora had converted her weapon into its hammer mode again to slam it down hard and fire the mallet to smash the machine even further into pieces. The one that she had knocked down was already back on its feet and tried to attack her from behind, only to get shot in the back by Ren with one Stormflower as he used the other to fire its grappler, which hooked onto the robot's shoulder to pull it down before he pierced its neck with his other weapon. Thanks. She smiled at him, causing Ren to nod in return with a smile of his own. The remaining 3 robots attempted to strike at Omega from all directions, bringing their glaives down on him. But Omega was able to block the multi-directional strike with his heavily armored arms before using his jet boosters to propel himself up in the air and break off their attack. He fired an explosive round of fire dust while airborne to destroy one android before falling back down to crush the 2nd under his own weight. When the 3rd tried to swing its glaive at him, Omega caught the blade in his own hands and pulled the robot in to grab it by the head. Inferior models. He crushed the enemy unit's head with little issue, while unceremoniously dropping its remains on the ground. Ah yeah, have I mentioned how much I love smashing robots? Nora said with a grin as they regrouped. But those were different from the ones we've fought before. Ren observed as he lightly kicked the remains of one down machine. Meh, you see one horde of killer robots, you've seen them all. Rouge shrugged. But you're right, those weren't badniks. The emblem they carried was identical to the other forms of equipment utilized by Merlot Industries. Omega said. One possibility is that someone has repurposed them for their own ends. And another possibility? Ren asked, thinking that Omega had another idea in mind. Someone from the former company survived its initial fall and is preparing to return. The former badnik said. Nora gave a gasp of realization. Guys, if those robots were sent here to ambush us, then maybe the others are walking into a trap. They can handle themselves, but you might be right, kiddo. Rouge agreed. We need to get to that tower now. With that said, the group tried to get to the tower they had spotted as quickly as they could. It seems like this whole thing may have been a trap. The cyclone had also made its way toward the island, having broken off its following of the ship in order to avoid being detected and arrived at an area some distance from the port. What is this place? John questioned as he and Yang sat in the seat behind Tails. Looks like some kind of island. Yang guessed. We should try and reach others and find a way to regroup. Blake suggested as she and Pyrrha continued to remain perched on the wings. Good idea. Tails tried to access the cyclone's comms. Sonic, are you there? However, all he got was static, which had also appeared on the screen of his plugged-in Miles Electric. Sonic, Knuckles, Amy. What's wrong? Pyrrha asked. We're being jammed, Tails said as he tried to adjust communications. Something's blocking the comms. Young even tried to pull out her scroll. RWBY. Weiss. Just like with Tails, all she got was static. But how? Why? John questioned. I don't understand. Blake was the first to figure it out as her eyes widened in surprise. They know we're here. We're being drawn in. Pyrrha then happened to spot something coming toward them from some low-hanging clouds. Several somethings. She had taken out Milo in its rifle mode and looked through the scope to get a closer look. She spotted flying patches of black and green coming closer. We have mutant Grimm incoming, she warned. True to her word, 8 mutated griffins had flown out from the clouds. They appeared to be much larger and bulkier than the normal griffins, their bodies having similar builds to that of Ursa's, complete with massive claws. They had several green glowing spikes coming from their backs and shoulders. Their wings were also incredibly large, having twice the span of their whole bodies, with their heads being just as big. But what stood out the most were their elongated tails, which also appeared to have another griffin's head to them. The one at the head roared as they flew at high speeds towards the cyclone. Hang on. Tails caused the cyclone to dive with John giving a startled scream. The mutant griffins flew in pursuit as they flailed their wings to send a series of razor-sharp feathers in the direction of the descending plane. Their attacks did graze the vessel, causing Blake and Pyrrha to return fire with their respective weapons' gun modes, though this only seemed to irritate them further. Tails, we can't fight them like this. Yang told him. I know. That's why we're going to ground. The young fox already directed his plane toward the nearest form of solid ground, which happened to be a large rocky hillside before quickly slowing his descent. Everyone off. Now, he ordered, causing the 4 students to get off the plane before Tails quickly converted the cyclone to its walker mode just as the mutant griffins surrounded them, 4 in the air with 4 on the ground. With a series of roars, the mutated Grimm went on the attack, the heroes dispersing to avoid being ganged up on. Yang fired off Ember Celica at one charging mutant griffin, but it barely even slowed it down before it was already on her, headbutting her to send her up before she fell back down and was pinned to the ground by its massive claws. It was about to bite down on her, but Blake had dashed past its face, slicing at it with Gamble Shroud to try and draw its attention. But all she did was get the attention of the secondary head attached to its tail as it lashed at her. She dispersed a shadow clone, lined with ice dust, just as it made contact, causing the head to get stuck. Blake then quickly moved into slice with her weapon to sever that one head at the tail, causing it to cry out in pain. Using this to her advantage, Yang had punched and fired Ember Celica into its neck to try and get it off her. It was pushed back before Yang tried to go on the offensive, slamming her gauntlet fists into its face, only to get pushed back with a headbutt. When it was about to come at her again, Blake fired at its face to get its attention. Young, you have to hold it by its neck. I'll go for the head, she called to her partner. Deciding to trust Blake, Young moved in to grab the mutant griffin by its neck. Hold still, you lousy piece of. It tried to shake her off, but Young used all the strength she could muster to keep herself steady as Blake used her semblance to provide an extra boost of speed and slice past its neck before repeating the process several times to completely cut its head off. The pair moved back just before it exploded in a flash of green. They didn't get much chance to celebrate as a second one landed behind them. Damn it, Young muttered in frustration. Just like the others, we have to cut off its heads. Blake told her. Which ones? Young questioned. Both. Just to be sure, Blake replied before they charged at the mutant griffin. Tails' cyclone backed away to gain some distance in its battle mode as he fired a round of ice dust at the ground of an approaching mutant griffin, causing it to explode in a flurry of ice spikes which pierced the altered Grim every which way and trapping it. Locking onto its head, Tails then fired a condensed beam of lightning dust that seemed to blast away its front head and most of its body. Though the tail head remained, the body was too damaged to regenerate itself before it exploded. Whoa! Tails yelped as he ducked to avoid a razor feather shot in his direction. 3 mutant griffins hovered above him and flailed their wings to throw multiple razor feathers at him, prompting Tails to activate the Cyclone's hardlight dust shields to protect himself from the onslaught. Can't stay in one place too long. The second the shields went done, Tails kept the Cyclone on the move as he fired what weapons he could to keep the Grim at bay, from the fire dust bombs to even his Vulcan mini-gun, but any injuries they received were quickly healed due to their regenerative abilities. This won't be easy, he muttered in annoyance. John had brought up the shield of Crocea Morse to block an incoming charge from one mutant griffin, though it had knocked him flat on his back. When the beast attempted to bite down on him, Pyrrha had already thrown a Ko-Oh out like a frisbee to slice at the upper area of its neck. With the mutant griffin disoriented from the attack, Pyrrha pressed forward as she charged, using her polarity semblance to call back her shield and wield Milo in its sword form to slice down at the damaged neck before it could regenerate. Using her semblance on her own weapon to enhance her strikes, Pyrrha was able to cut off the main head. She walked towards John with a smile and offered him her hand, and he would have taken it, except he noticed the tail head about to lunge at her from behind. Pyrrha, watch out. His warning came just in time as she instinctively brought out her shield to block the lunge of the tail head. The force did push her back somewhat as she looked in shock to see the body of the mutant griffin stand up completely, despite its main head being cut off, the tail head now appearing in control. When it tried to lunge at her again, John this time rushed in between and used his shield to block it. But rather than just take it like before, he angled the shield and himself to slide underneath the strike so that not only did it avoid hitting Pyrrha, it had let itself open for him to give a mighty swing with Crocea Morse to slice off the tail head. With both heads gone, the mutant fell to the ground before it died and exploded. However, they soon found themselves facing against another mutant griffin as it landed in the place of its fallen brethren to roar at them. We cut off its main head, but it was still alive. Pyrrha recalled. Looks like we gotta cut off both this time, John observed before calling out to the rest of their comrades. Everyone, you have to cut off both heads. Just one won't be enough. Yeah, we noticed, Young exclaimed as she wrestled a mutant griffin by the neck, only for it to stand up on its hind legs and slam her body into the ground once. When that didn't shake her off, she was slammed down a second time and then a third before being forced to let go at the fourth. Blake then landed on the mutant griffin's back, which drew the attention of the tail head as it tried to lunge at her. But using another shadow clone-lined ice dust, the head got stuck, just like before, and gave her the means to cut off the head at the tail joint. Young had managed to push herself up as she glared angrily at the single-headed mutant. Her eyes burning red as her hair lit on fire. She gave a yell as she charged forward, using all the gathered energy she got from being slammed onto the ground multiple times, and all the other attacks she took. She pulled her fist back and slammed it hard on the mutant griffin's skull to completely shatter it and obliterate the head in one explosive strike. Though she fell to her knees in exhaustion, prompting Blake to come and help her to her feet. Come on, we're not done yet, Blake told her as they had to stay on the move. John and Pyrrha backed away as another mutant griffin approached them. It leapt into the air to flap its wings and send a hail of razor feathers in their direction, prompting them to run as they tried to protect themselves with their respective shields. But that's when John got an idea. Pyrrha, try and frisbee its wings off with your shield. On it. Stopping her run, Pyrrha threw out a koho in a similar manner, making sure she aimed for the joint of the right wing and was able to slice it off. The mutant griffin then fell to the ground, but Pyrrha used her semblance to call back her shield and made sure to aim it properly to slice off its other wing before it returned to her hand. It may not be down for long. It could regenerate its wings. Pyrrha stated. Then we're finishing it now. John replied. You go for the main head, I'll get the one on the tail. Understood. She nodded before they ran towards the grounded mutant. Pyrrha went straight for the front, prompting the mutant griffin to charge at her before standing on its hind legs like an ursa to swipe its right claw at her, which she blocked with a koho before jumping into the air and impaling Milo in its javelin form through its throat. She pulled it down to pull the mutant down with her before twisting and heaving upward to slice off that head. At the same time, John used the same method as before as he used his shield to block the lunging tail head and push up to knock it upwards and exposing the appendage, which he cut down with a slice of Crocea morse. The monster fell dead before it exploded in green light like the others. Tails in the cyclone was forced to back up as the last 3 mutant griffins approached him with snarling and vicious growls. Nothing I do seems to have any lasting effect. Tails said as he tried to think of a way to get past this. No choice, I need use maximum fire power. He patted the side of his battle mech. Sorry about this, old girl. I promise to fix you up and make you all better when this is all over. Tails then made a break for it in one direction, prompting the mutant griffins to rush after him before he fired a gravity dust missile, making sure to aim it precisely above the flying monsters. He needed to get them all in one go. The young fox then fired a precise shot from his mini-gun, causing the gravity dust missile to explode in midair and create a purple-colored explosion that emitted a powerful gravity pulse to press all 3 mutant griffins to the ground and keep them pinned. That won't hold them long. Tails moved the cyclone to the point where all 3 of the monsters were in a semi-perfect line in front of him. He pressed the appropriate commands on his controls. Diverting all power to the central weapon. Need to make sure auxiliary power will be directed to motor control once it's all down. The display on the plugged-in Miles Electric showed all the energy, including dust munitions, being transferred to one function that was labeled, Power Laser, on the screen. Power Laser at maximum power. Fire. Tails slammed his fist onto the button. A massive, multicolored laser was shot out from the front of the Cyclone's mech mode, one so large that it dwarfed even the mech itself. The laser engulfed all 3 of the grounded mutant griffins, and was also lined with all kinds of dust, creating explosions and flashes of fire, ice, lightning, gravity, and other elemental forms of power. Young, Blake, Pyrrha, and John all looked in absolute shock at the size and power of the laser before the attack stopped. When the light vanished, all 3 of the mutant monsters were completely gone, leaving only a scorched trail that was carved into the ground. The cyclone, which was now venting lots of smoke, crouched down as nearly all its power had been drained. Tails coughed as he tried to wave the smoke away before using his dual tails like a propeller to blow the smoke away. Tails, are you okay? Blake asked as the 4 students regrouped with him. What was that? The power laser. Tails explained. The Cyclone's most powerful weapon. It takes nearly all the energy the Cyclone has stored up and unleashes it all in one deadly blast. That one just happened to be more powerful because that also used up all the dust I had inside. Maybe you should lead with something like that. Yang said. I can't. Tails shook his head. Like I said, it uses up all the Cyclone's power. It'll take a while for it to recharge, and the motor functions still work thanks to auxiliary power, but my weapons will be offline until then. I understand. A weapon of last resort. Pyrrha nodded. No kidding, that was something else. John was still in awe. However, Yang couldn't help but look away as Tails' description of the power laser, as well as her own performance against those mutants in trying to overpower them, brought to mind some of the words Knuckles had said to her before this whole mess started. You have an impressive ability, and it can be a good fallback too. But you don't have to use it with every fight. You can't become so dependent on your power. You have to learn to fight smarter, not harder. Yang clenched her fists as she tried to push those memories back. Now is not the time to be thinking about that. Focus on the mission. Everything else can wait. Blake noticed the turmoil her partner appeared to be in and felt some sympathy for her as she had a good idea what she was thinking. So, she decided to change the subject to get Yang's mind off all that. "Did you guys notice the way those mutants were?" Blake asked. "They were bigger, their bodies, they had the same kind of build as Ursa's. I kind of focused more on the wings that could shoot bladed feathers." John pointed out. "I thought was a Nevermore's trick." "It is," Kira confirmed. "Normal griffins can't do that. And that additional head attached to their tails, I read about a Grimm that had a similar feature. A sphinx, but those are native to Solitas and Anima, not Sanus." "Yeah, I get what you're saying," Tails said as the Cyclone's auxiliary power kicked in, allowing the battle mech to stand up, but the weapons were still offline. Beowulf's with 3 heads, Ursa's with 2 heads and 4 arms, Nevermore's with 4 wings and explosive projectiles. Plus there was that nightmare-fueled Deathstalker Beowulf hybrid a while back. John reminded. "Yeah, definitely not getting any sleep over that. These aren't just random mutations." Tails continued. "These Grimm aren't just stronger. Some of these features are able to help eliminate any potential weaknesses the original species have. Someone is specifically designing these mutants so that they're improved over the original. That's really terrifying to think about," Blake said with a shudder. "So let's go find whoever's doing this and pound them into the ground," Yang said angrily, directing her frustrations toward the objective. "No, we should regroup with the others first before we come up with a plan of attack," Kira contradicted. "How are we supposed to do that if all our comms are down?" Yang argued. "By finding the source." Tails had detached the Miles Electric, which could function independently from the Cyclone, and he begun to work his magic. "There is some kind of radio interference that's blocking communications. I can't get an exact location of the source, but I can still get a rough estimate, and it seems the source is coming from 3 key locations." "What about that tower over there?" John pointed to something that looked akin to a cell phone tower. "Maybe we can use it to call everyone. And if they're also getting interference, maybe they're thinking of the same thing," Blake suggested. "We might run into them on the way." "That is a good suggestion and a strong possibility. I think we should do it," Kira agreed. "Fine," Yang said with reluctance as she looked away with crossed arms. "All right, let's go. But keep your guard up. There might be more mutants on the way, too," Tails instructed as he directed the Cyclone's mech toward the tower with the 4 students right alongside him. "Yo, is anyone there? Hello?" Sonic questioned over the comms himself as he tried to contact the rest of their team, he and Shadow having also arrived on the island. Shadow had said it would be best to reach one of the shores that was around a bend and away from the docking ship to avoid being spotted. But the second they reached land, they were just as much radio dead as everyone else. "We're being jammed, which means Eggman or whoever is working with him knows we're here," Shadow stated. "So maybe splitting up wasn't such a good idea," Sonic said. "Think we can scour the island? With how fast we are?" "No. We know nothing of this terrain and we're just as liable to walk right into a trap," the ultimate life form replied. "We search the immediate perimeter and find everyone else. No time for stealth," Sonic said. "If the bad guys know we're here, let's smash some monsters until we—" A loud scream caught both their attention as they looked toward top of a nearby cliff to see a familiar girl running from a squadron of robots. It was a girl they recognized right away. RWBY. Sonic immediately dashed off with Shadow right behind him. The red-clad girl was knocked down by a glaive strike from one of the 10 Merlot androids that appeared to be attacking her. She backed on her rear, but stopped just shy of the edge of the cliff she was on, glancing down to see a sheer 100-foot drop that would certainly be fatal should she fall. She looked up in terror as the android at the lead raised its glaive with killing intent. Fortunately, a blue blur shot up from the cliff behind RWBY, delivering a homing attack to destroy the robot. Sonic gave his titular grin as he drew Caliburn and went on the offensive, slicing at the legs of one robot before striking with a spin dash to knock the legless robot into a third. A fourth tried to strike, but he had already leapt over it and dashed downward with a slice of Caliburn to slice and destroy that robot before zooming with another homing attack to take down the fifth. The last 5 tried to get the drop on Sonic, only for Shadow to teleport in the middle of the pack and unleash his black tornado to send them all up and flying in multiple directions. 3 were thrown over the cliff while 2 were sent crashing and breaking along the rocky ground. Sonic, Shadow. RWBY exclaimed in relief as Sonic offered her his hand. Are you okay? He asked as he helped her up. I'm fine. But I got separated from the rest of my group. RWBY explained, sounding like she was panicking a bit. Those robots jumped us the second we got off the ship, and I can't call anybody else. Our comms are jammed. Yeah, it's a pain we both share. Sonic said in minor annoyance. What happened to your weapon? Shadow questioned upon seeing that RWBY didn't have Crescent Rose with her. I had got lost in the scuffle. Sorry if I'm useless, RWBY looked down in shame. You're not useless, Sonic assured with his smile. Stuff happens. But we're here and we're gonna find everyone. Right. RWBY nodded before smiling. So how do we do that? Shadow then glanced in the opposite direction and noticed 3 towers that were relatively close to the shoreline, one being closer than the others. Those towers appear to have cellular technology, likely the source of the radio interference. If any of the others have spotted them, they are probably heading in that direction as well. So, we'll either meet them there or on the way, or we'll get comms working and be able to call them. I'd say that's a win-win. Sonic said. Alright, I'll follow you guys. RWBY said. Let's go. Sonic said as he and Shadow ran at a normal pace as opposed to their usual high-speed ones in order to allow RWBY to keep close to them. However, as they ran, neither of the hedgehogs seemed to notice that RWBY had a slight sinister on her face. Meanwhile, the real RWBY gave a groan of frustration as she continued to hear static through her scroll. Aw, dang it, it's still all scrambled. Any luck? Knuckles asked Weiss as they and Amy all stood at the base of one of the cellular towers while Weiss herself was working at a console that seemed to connect to the tower's systems. I think I almost. The Schnee heiress said as she continued to type away before the screen turned dark. Got it. The tower is deactivated. Let's see if that helped. Amy opened the comms channel. Hey, is anybody there? Does anyone read me? Amy, Buzz. Signals not quite. Buzz, another tower. We'll get to. Buzz, that was all she could get from Tails before it went down again. It's still on the fritz. Amy said. But I think Tails might be on his way to another tower. We did see 2 others. What about Sonic or anyone else? RWBY asked. I don't think we're going to get any more information until those other towers are down. Weiss replied. We should try and shut them down too. Maybe we'll run into some of our friends along the way. Good idea. But I don't think they're going to let us. Knuckles pointed downward, where the group looked to see 10 more Merlot androids having arrived, all their glaives drawn. Great. More robots. Weiss sighed in annoyance as she drew Merton. Let's show these buckets of bolts who's boss. RWBY declared as she had Crescent Rose out and ready before firing at the robots below. She was able to headshot one of them while the others were forced to scatter, to which Knuckles and Amy pressed on as they leapt off the ramp and toward the ground. Knuckles had pulled out one Galatine blade to cut down the staff of one of the androids before following with a punch through its chest. A second tried to get him from behind, but he used his second blade to block the glaive strike before leaping with another punch to obliterate the head. He then charged for a third that thrusted its glaive at him, but Knuckles crossed his Galatine blades to block before slicing in an X formation with enough strength to shatter the blade and lunge to pierce and destroy that very robot. 3 of the robots tried to gang up at Amy, coming at her from all sides. However, she was able to spin her body around while holding out the Pico Pico to knock away all their weapons before spinning even faster to unleash her Tornado Hammer technique to blow back all 3 robots and knock them flat on their back. While they were down, Amy acted quickly to slam her hammer down onto the head of one and crush it. As the second tried to stand up, Amy was already there to smash its head off with a mighty swing. The third was already back on its feet, but Amy moved quickly and swung her hammer upwards to knock away the glaive before smashing the robot in the side to cripple it and then destroy it with a slamming of hammer to head. The last 3 robots had made it up the ramp and charged to where Weiss and RWBY were waiting. The latter used her own speed to close the distance and swung Crescent Rose to try and trip them up while Weiss lunged forward to impale one android from behind and pulled it back to kick it off the ramp and onto the ground. The 2 came back to back as they used their respective weapons to block and parry the glaives of the last 2 robots. Exchanging quick looks and nods, RWBY ducked and swung her scythe at the legs of the robot that Weiss had been facing while Weiss lunged her sword into the neck area of the machine her own partner had faced before swinging outward to decapitate the robot just as RWBY had leapt over the legless android and swung crescent rows to decapitate that was well while it was down. "Yeah, good job, team," RWBY cheered. "Let's not celebrate until after we meet up with the others," Weiss said. "Good idea. Let's go," Amy said as she motioned for the two students to come down the ramp where she and Knuckles were waiting before they went on ahead to whichever tower was closest to their current location. Meanwhile, Omega, Nora, and Ren had just finished taking out a squadron of androids that had been guarding the base of the second tower as RWBY worked at the console before it finally shut down. Done. The anthropomorphic bat dusted her hands in pride. "Let's see if we got a better signal." She opened the comms. "Shadow. You read me." "Rouge, I read you," Buzz barely. "The signal's still Buzz, can't pick up your exact location. Buzz interference needs to be cleared, Buzz. Keep it up." "So not quite there yet?" Nora asked. "Close but no cigar," Rouge replied. "There is far less radio interference now," Omega said. "In addition to this tower, our allies have likely deactivated another. This leaves only one remaining. We'll probably meet up with everyone else there." Ren deduced. "Where's the last tower?" "Approximately 3 kilometers northwest from our current location," Omega answered. "Then let's not keep everyone else waiting. Come on." Rouge motioned for everyone else to follow as Omega led them in the direction of the final radio tower. "Okay, I can see the tower," Sonic said as he, Shadow and RWBY quickly approached one of the towers. He then noticed something odd about the supposed girl next to him. "Hey, RWBY, are you feeling alright?" Yeah. Why?" she asked, while Shadow paid a slight suspicious glance. "You just seem a little quiet," Sonic replied. "You really haven't said much of anything the whole time we were here." "I guess I just don't have anything to say," RWBY said with a shrug. "You don't even seem interested in looking for crescent rows," Sonic pointed out. "I mean, you love that thing like it was your dog." "Well, maybe I'm just more eager to find the rest of our friends." "Aren't you?" she replied, sounding a bit more accusatory, something that caused Sonic to look in shock. "Why yeah, of course I am. But we all know they can handle themselves, right?" Sonic held his hands up defensively, caught off guard by her tone while Shadow narrowed his eyes further. RWBY also happened to notice the way Shadow was looking at her and then spotted 5 of their friends at the base of the tower and decided to divert their attention. "Hey, speaking of which, hey guys. Over here," she called out with a wave before making her way closer to them. Sonic was right behind her, while Shadow passed for a second before following them. Hearing her sister's voice, Young turned in the direction of the source of the sound and found what appeared to be her sister. RWBY. Young wasted no time in rushing towards her with a hug while Blake, Pyrrha, and John all followed. The older blonde scooped up her supposed sister in a hug. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine. Don't worry," she assured as Young set her down. "But what about Weiss? Or Knuckles or Amy? Weren't you with them?" Blake asked. "We were ambushed by a bunch of robots when we got on the island," RWBY explained. "I got separated from everyone else. But Sonic and Shadow bailed me out." She gestured to the 2 hedgehogs that were now alongside her. "What happened to your weapon?" John asked. "Lost it," RWBY shrugged. "So, you found a radio tower," Shadow observed. "Yes. Tails should have it deactivated in a moment," Pyrrha answered. "Just done," Tails said with a clap as he stood at the console that had just turned dark, the Cyclone's battlemech parked right next to him. "The interference should be cleared." "Great work, buddy," Sonic congratulated with a point of his finger. "Glad to know we were all on the same page." They all turned up towards the sky to see Rouge flying in with Omega, Ren, and Nora coming down a nearby rocky hill just below her. "Hate to keep bouncing from tower to tower, not knowing which was still running or not. I hate running around in circles." "You're all here." Pyrrha smiled as she saw her teammates, though was caught off guard as Nora leapt at her in a hug. "Yeah. Team JNPR's back together," Nora exclaimed in childlike glee. "But we're still missing Weiss, Knuckles, and Amy," Ren pointed out. "It shouldn't be that hard to find them now," Tails answered. With the last of the towers down, and the interference gone, we should be able to call them up with no problem. I don't think we have to. I think I see them over there. Blake said as he pointed toward a crevice in between some rocks and a few SDC shipping containers where they saw the rest of their friends heading their way. Hey, guys, over here, John called to them. Amy, Weiss, and Knuckles had ran out as they heard John calling to them. Looks like everyone's regrouped, Weiss said as they all came out into the open. Great, now we can. However, Sonic and everyone else looked in surprise to see the fourth person that was with the newly arrived group. It was RWBY. In the flesh, she was with them. Hey everyone, she waved to her friends. What are all of you? The second she stepped forward, the rest of the group cleared away to reveal the other RWBY that Sonic and Shadow had both found upon their arrival to the island. This reveal caused Knuckles, Amy, and Weiss to look in just as much shock as the rest of their friends, save for Shadow, who simply glared at the RWBY he and Sonic had found. But none were more surprised than RWBY herself, who only tilted her head in confusion. Who's your friend? It's an imposter. RWBY pointed to the genuine article. It must be one of Eggman's robots disguised as me. What? No, I'm the real RWBY. What in the world is going on here? Weiss questioned, looking back towards her partner. Two RWBYs, Nora exclaimed. Can Eggman make an android like that? Ren questioned towards Rouge. A near-identical copy of someone else. Or even a clone. No, nothing like this. She said seriously. Omega, is one of them a robot? Rouge asked her teammate, who quickly scanned both of them. Negative. Both are organic, the former Badnik reported. So, which is the real RWBY? John questioned. I can't tell. They both look identical, Kira said as she looked in between them. Young, you know me. I'm your sister. We grew up together. The fake RWBY tried to appeal to the blonde, who only backed away in confusion, not sure what to make from this. Stay back. Blake put herself in between the fake RWBY and her partner. She wasn't sure which RWBY was real, so until they found out, she was on the defensive with both. Hey, don't talk to Young, you fake me. The real RWBY looked ready to join in, but Amy held out her hand to stop her from advancing any closer. Sonic, where did you find that RWBY? She asked. We ran into her the second we got to shore, and that's when Sonic got an idea as he looked seriously to the RWBY with Knuckles, Amy, and Weiss. RWBY, do you have Crescent Rose with you? Of course, I do. She pulled out her weapon and showed its scythe configuration. I never forget my baby. Oh, come on. She stole it from me. The fake RWBY still tried to play the act. Was your RWBY ever separated from you? Shadow questioned Knuckles' group seriously. Was she ever apart from you for even a moment? No, she's been with us the entire time. Knuckles confirmed. That was all Shadow needed to hear as he delivered a punch to the fake RWBY's gut, appearing to knock the wind out of her and grab her by the throat before using his speed to slam and pin her into metal pillar at the base of the radio tower. Your mannerisms were different from hers. Shadow began as everyone else came behind the black hedgehog and had their weapons at the draw, more than ready for a fight if this imposter were to give one. You weren't as talkative. That aside, you made no attempt to use your semblance when those androids were attacking you. And just now, your aura didn't activate when I struck you. If you even have aura. So, he squeezed harder. Who are you? Despite being pinned in a firm grip around her own throat, the fake RWBY chuckled. Aw damn it, here I was hoping I could get at least one of you. You hedgehogs are too fast for me to get the drop on, but it seems like your pals are just as quick. So, no point in hiding anymore. The imposter's body shifted and changed to reveal his true form. He was little more than 3 feet in height, and had the appearance of an anthropomorphic octopus with bluish-violet skin. He had 4 long tentacles on his head that dangled like dreadlocks, with a white muzzle for a mouth and wrinkles on his beak. He wore a black cloak around his body with black boots and had suction cups on his hands. But what stood out the most were his black sclera and white eyes. It gave the impression of his face being almost akin to a skull. Well, kids, what do you think? He questioned in a shrill and sinister voice, his appearance and the ability to shapeshift taking all the Huntsman students by surprise, as were Amy, Tails, and even Sonic, while Knuckles and Rouge narrowed their eyes and Omega's optics flared red. Yeah, I do look pretty scary, don't I? Mimic, I presume. Shadow kept his grip firm around his neck. "Oh, the big bad ultimate lifeform knows me. I guess I should be honored." The imposter, whose name was revealed to be Mimic, said mockingly. "You will tell me everything you know, or else this will be a very painful experience for you." The black hedgehog threatened. "Yeah, I could help you," Mimic mused. "Or you could help my friend with a little experiment of his." "They're all yours, Doc. Release the beasts," he called out to seemingly nobody else. In that moment, the rocky hill on the other side of the flat ground at the base of the tower began to shift, revealing a large, man-made, metallic doorway as the whole hill itself appeared to be artificial. The door pulled open like a garage as four large figures stepped out to reveal themselves to the heroes, who looked in shock at their appearance. They appeared to be Ursas, clearly mutants, but they were different from those found in the Forever Fall forest. They were the size as natural Ursa majors and had the normal number of heads and arms, but they were also completely covered in bone-white armor from head to toe. They all had long and glowing green spikes sticking out from their spines that stretched down from the tips of their heads to their own rears. These monsters roared at the surprised heroes. Even Shadow is briefly caught off guard by this, which caused him to lose his grip on Mimic, who used the distraction to kick the arm that held him by the throat, forcing him to let him go. Before Shadow could even make an attempt to recapture him, Mimic threw something to the ground, a flash grenade that emitted a bright light and forced many of the heroes to cover their eyes. "Omega, shoot him," Shadow ordered. The flash had no effect on Omega's optics as he switched to infrared and spotted Mimic leaping above them and moving closer to where the mutant Ursas emerged. The former Badnik opened fire with his machine guns, but Mimic slid under the legs of one mutant Ursa and used its armor body for cover as he ran into the doorway, which closed behind him with a chuckle as the flare vanished. "What happened? Where is he?" Yang questioned. "Gone. But we have bigger problems right now." Amy pointed to the charging quartet of mutant Ursa. "Split up," RWBY told everyone. Team Sonic, RWBY, Dark, and JNPR. One team per mutant. Deciding to follow her lead, the four teams had split into four separate directions throughout the immediate area, prompting each of the mutants to do the same in pursuit of the teams. Team Sonic faced off against one mutant Ursa as it charged at them. Sonic sped right up to it and dealt a series of homing attacks across its body, all while slashing with Caliburn, but the beast's armor seemed to protect it as Sonic zipped behind it to look in surprise as there was barely even a scratch from all that. When the mutant Ursa turned around to face Sonic, Knuckles had leapt onto its shoulders to try and bring Galatine down on its right shoulder near the neck. Though his axe blades did penetrate the armor somewhat, it did little to stop the mutant as it threw itself back to a wall in an attempt to shake the Knuckles off. Tails was able to quickly fly forward and pull Knuckles off just as Amy slammed the Pico Pico onto its right leg to try and trip it up. Only for the monster to lift its arms to try and smash her, but Amy was able to quickly move back and avoid the crushing strike that shook up much of the ground. "That thing's armor is thick," Amy noticed. "Not sure we can cut through." "I might be able to, but it's not gonna hold still long enough for me to do any lasting damage," Knuckles stated. "Tails, anything on the Cyclone that can bust through?" Sonic asked. "I had to go into overdrive earlier so its systems are down," Tails replied. "Alright, we'll think of something else," Sonic said. "Incoming," Amy warned as the mutant Ursa curled itself up into a ball, similar to that of a Borbitusk, and spun itself like a spindish to shoot itself at the team, the four splitting into separate directions to barely avoid it. "Whoa," Sonic exclaimed as the mutant's attack slammed hard into a stone wall to completely obliterate the stone before it stood back up with a roar. Team RWBY attempted to move around the second mutant Ursa at all sides, while attacking in every way they could, trying to avoid staying in one place too long to keep the monster from attacking. Though Yang tried to get up in its face and slam her gauntlets into said face with multiple punches, only for the mutant to swipe her off. "Weiss, you try and pin it down. Blake and I will go for the head," RWBY ordered. "I'm on it." Weiss conjured a glyph below the mutant Ursa and channeled the gravity dust form her rapier into it to force the monster down on all fours. "Blake," RWBY called to her teammate. "Ladybug." "Right." She nodded in understanding as the pair ran on opposite sides of the pinned and struggling monster before dashing right at it with their blades hanging out. Using their respective semblances to boost their speed, they had hoped to slice at the neck and dash past each other to repeat the process until its head was completely cut off. Only for their blades to get stuck in the armor that surrounded its neck, much to their shock. "What?" Blake exclaimed while Ruby's eyes widened in surprise. The mutant Ursa raised its head slightly, still pinned under Weiss' glyph as it saw the girl responsible for this predicament. It then opened its mouth to spit a corrosive liquid right at her. Weiss was forced to move and avoid the deadly acid that melted the ground she was previously standing on, but this forced her to release the glyph that kept the mutant Ursa pinned, who rose and shook its body fiercely to successfully shake off Ruby and Blake. It felt multiple explosions along its back as Yang tried to charge from behind, throwing out multiple blasts as she punched with Ember Celica until she closed the gap and leapt upward to wrap her legs around its neck and tried to punch its face again. Only for the mutant to bite down onto her left arm and catch her before throwing her away. "That thing can spit acid," Weiss exclaimed as she, Ruby and Blake tried to regroup with Yang. "Not only that, but its neck is protected. We can't decapitate it," the Faunus girl added. Ruby gulped as she desperately tried to figure out a plan to stop this monster. The third mutant Ursa curled itself up for a spindish attack as it shot itself right toward Team Dark, the trio dispersing to avoid the crashing impact that obliterated a series of shipping containers. When it stopped, Omega unleashed a volley of missiles from behind as Shadow leapt above to throw out a series of chaos spears. Even Rouge added to it as she threw out one of her heart-shaped bombs, resulting in a large explosion that appeared to engulf the creature. Team Dark had gathered together to look as the smoke cleared and saw the mutant Ursa stand back up. Though their combined assault did appear to break off much of its armor, it was quickly replaced by newer armor thanks to its regenerative powers. "Its armor is not indestructible. It can be broken," Omega observed. "Only to grow back." Rouge scoffed in annoyance. "This won't be easy." Shadow kept his eyes narrowed as he tried to figure out a way to overcome this monster. There had to be a way. Nothing was ever truly invincible. At the same time, Team JNPR found itself stuck against the last mutant Ursa as it charged at them. Nora ran towards its side as she fired Monhild's grenade launcher mode. Though that did seem to damage it a bit, any damage was quickly healed as it turned to face her before spitting some acid in her direction, forcing her to jump back and avoid the attack. "There's gotta be something we can do," John stated as he, Pyrrha, and Ren backed up slightly. "I don't think we have anything powerful enough to break off its armor," Ren said. That's when John ended up backing into one of the support beams of the radio tower that he, Tails, and the others were previously working on, and that's when an idea came to him. "Pyrrha, you said back at the Forever Fall that you could bring down that train track, right?" John recalled. "Yes, with enough concentration," Pyrrha confirmed. "Well, what about this tower?" John asked, refereeing to the tower behind them. "Can you maybe bring it down onto that thing?" Pyrrha looked up at the tower and saw what John was hoping to accomplish. "Yes, I can do it. If you keep that monster underneath, I can handle the rest." "Perfect." John smiled. "Nora, let's get that thing under the tower." "On it." Nora nodded as she rolled to the side and avoided the crushing blow of the mutant. "Hey big boy, follow me," Nora called to it, prompting the mutant Ursa to rush after her as she brought it directly underneath the radio tower, where John and Ren joined her and kept moving all around its sides. With the monster appearing distracted, Pyrrha came behind one of the support legs of the tower and focused her semblance directly on it. While she would normally go for a more subtle approach, she went on a rather larger scale here as she began to bend and twist the metal of the leg, causing the tower to begin to creak and bend. John used his shield to block a claw strike from the mutant, though the force of the impact still pushed him back toward one of the support structures. Ren then diverted the monster's attention toward himself as he fired Storm Flower towards its right side, while Nora came in from the other and slammed Monhild in its hammer configuration on the left rear leg, causing the beast to topple over, though it did spit some acid on her in retaliation. As they kept it distracted, Pyrrha had appeared to finish her job as the tower's support was so thoroughly twisted that the metal began to crack and break under the pressure, until it snapped completely. For good measure, she also sent a pulse of polarity up through the rest of the structure to try and break off some of its connecting points. "Run, now," Pyrrha called to her teammates as the tower began to break apart. Not needing to be told twice, Team JNPR ran as far away from the collapsing radio tower as they could. The entire structure broke and fell apart as the mutant Ursa roared and tried to curl up to shield itself, but the force and pressure of the collapsing tower was far too much as it broke through its armor, and many of the falling beams of metal were able to pierce through its body every which way. One pole happened to break through its neck as the monster was completely skewered and buried. When they saw a flash of green underneath the rubble, Team JNPR knew that they were finished and the monster was dead, much to their relief. Gee, good work everyone. John took a moment to catch his breath, while Pyrrha and Ren smiled as Nora punched his arm in a friendly fashion. Not bad, team leader. She congratulated, causing her to smile. The collapsing tower drew the attention of everyone else and even the remaining 3 mutant Ursas. Yang had hoped to use this to her advantage as she rushed the one she and her team were fighting and slammed into its side to knock it back, though it quickly got back up and swiped its massive claw at her to send her flying and crashing into a shipping container. We're not getting anywhere like this, Blake stated. Its armor is too strong. Weiss added. Then let's try and make it softer, Ruby suggested. What do you mean? Blake asked. Weiss, can you use a glyph to reflect its acid spit back at it? So that we can melt off some of its armor and try to cut its head off? Ruby asked her partner. Weiss took a moment to think. I never thought of that. My glyphs can't exactly reflect per se, but if I used wind dust, I can send it back. Then let's do it, Ruby said as she used Petal Burst to move in as the monster had her sister cornered. Yang tried to pull herself up, but Ruby fired Crescent Rose at its back to draw its attention to her. Hey ugly. Give me a latte. The biggest and grossest one you got. The mutant Ursa roared at her as it moved closer to try and swipe its claws, but Ruby used her speed to avoid all the slashes before taunting it again. Come on, I said a latte. Spit on me. Spit on me like I called your mom ugly. That seemed to do the trick as the mutant Ursa sent a stream of acid from its mouth right at her, only for Weiss to appear in between them and thrust Myrtanaster and conjure a glyph that not only acted as a shield against the acid, but when she infused wind dust into it, it created a vertical whirlwind that blew it right back, covering the monster in its own corrosive spit. The mutant Ursa roared in agony as it felt its armor being melted off with the acid even going deeper inside. Though its regenerative powers tried to push it back, the outer armor was significantly weakened. Blake, Ladybug repeat, Ruby told the cat girl. Understood. She joined Ruby as they once again came at the beast from opposite sides with their respective speed, boosted by their semblances and natural abilities, drawing their blades to cut at the neck as they dashed past each other. The first strike was enough to break off the weakened and partially melted armor around its neck before coming in again with a dual slice to completely sever its head. What was left of the mutant exploded shortly after. We did it, right? Ruby asked. Yeah, we did it. Blake confirmed with a nod and a smile, causing Ruby to smile back. As Yang struggled to push herself up, Weiss had come to her and offered her a hand, which she accepted as she was pulled back on her feet. Are you okay? Weiss asked. I'm fine. Yang brushed off, though at the same time, she couldn't help but be frustrated. She was of no help at all in taking that monster down. While she was proud of Ruby for doing it, the fact that she was basically useless in the final execution only added to the frustrations she was already feeling. Knuckles stood his ground as he caught the spindish of the mutant Ursa he was facing. He dug his feet into the ground and pushed back as hard as he could. Knuckles, flip it over. Sonic told him. We'll handle the rest. Deciding to trust his friend's judgment, Knuckles used his strength to haul up the rotating form of the mutant and haul it over his head, sending the monster flying up and over before it landed on the ground in a large boom that shook up most of the surrounding area. While it's down, double crockle in the air. Tails with me. Knuckles, you send Amy up. On it. Knuckles nodded. Let's do it. Amy responded. Ready when you are. Tails offered his hand to Sonic, who took it as the two performed a double spin dash attack with their own bodies and went up into the air. At the same time, Knuckles allowed Amy to step onto his hands before he threw her straight up as well, angling herself so that not only did she meet the conjoined blue and yellow blur, but even aimed her intended strike where it was meant to be. With a mighty swing of her Pico Pico, Amy had sent Sonic and Tails together back towards the ground. The mutant Ursa didn't have time to get back up as the blue and yellow double spindish struck its head with enough force that it completely shattered the armor around it and obliterated the head. The pair slid to a halt just as the mutant Ursa exploded behind them for dramatic purposes. The duo exchanged a high five when it was all done and over with. Team Dark faced off against the final mutant as Omega caught its clawed strike and hauled it over himself to send it flying and crashing to the ground belly up. Omega then shot himself in the air via his boosters and concentrated his heavy artillery, from missiles to fire dust bombs, in an attempt to break through the armor on its chest. If its outer hide is protected, its insides are likely more vulnerable. Omega deduced as he landed, only to watch as the mutant Ursa stood back up and all its injuries were quickly healed. Heavier ordnance would be required, Omega said as he backed away to avoid the acid spit. He may be onto something. If we can get past its armor, we can destroy it. Rouge said to Shadow. I'll do it. The black hedgehog appeared to have an idea in mind. When you see an opening, use one of your bombs. After you. She teasingly bowed and allowed Shadow to step forward. She didn't need to ask, she trusted Shadow's judgment and would move in when the time was right. The mutant Ursa then looked towards the approaching Shadow as he had drawn Arondite in his right hand. He then used his left hand to wave toward himself, taunting the mutant into coming for him. The monster roared in response as it charged at him and tried to crush him underneath its front claws, only for Shadow to teleport above it. It gazed upward as Shadow came down. When it looked like it was about to spit acid at him, Shadow had thrown another Chaos Spear to blast away the acid and allow the way to be cleared for him to close the gap and lunge Arondite into its open mouth, the sword breaking through the back of its skull. Rouge. Shadow kept a firm grip as the mutant gagged and tried to shake him off, but he wouldn't budge. Now is her chance. The bat flew directly to the monsters behind and had one of her bombs drawn. Right as Shadow pulled his sword out and leapt back, Rouge shoved her bomb through the opening he had made in the back of its skull and flew backwards. The mutant Ursa felt something in its head, but it wasn't able to properly process it until it heard a few beeps before the bomb exploded, obliterating the head and most of its neck and shoulder area. Team Dark had gathered together as they saw the headless beast fall down before it exploded in a green flurry. All mutant targets have been destroyed. Omega reported as Team Sonic, RWBY, and JNPR all met back up with Team Dark again. But those were different than the other mutants we've seen. Yang said. They could spit a corrosive substance and even attack like Borbatusks. Pyrrha noted. Their armor was also stronger, especially around the neck. Weiss added. We found out we could kill them if we decapitated them, but it's like they adapted to counter that. Tails finished. Or rather, whoever is behind this, adapted them. Yeah, that's scary, but I'm also worried about that fake RWBY that came out of nowhere. Sonic pointed out, with RWBY herself looking a little nervous. She, or he, looked and sounded just like her. I couldn't tell the difference. His name is Mimic, he's a shapeshifter. Shadow revealed. And he's from our world. You know him? John asked. This was the first time I've met him personally, but I know of him. Shadow began. You recall our time in the Twilight Cage? Don't remind me. Knuckles groaned. Twilight Cage? RWBY asked, looking towards Sonic for an answer. Long story short, we had to go to another dimension to fight a world-dominating psychopath and his little army. But it also had this freaky time-space thing going on around it. We were in there for a couple days at most, only for a few years to pass by on our world. The blue hedgehog explained. While we were in there, Eggman almost completely took over the whole planet. Days in another dimension, but years go by in your world. Weiss tried to wrap her head around the idea. That sounds somewhat far-fetched. As far-fetched as a blue talking hedgehog that can run at speed of sound in his sneakers. Yang responded dryly. Weiss blinked a few times before conceding. Fair point. While we were gone, there were two major factions that stood against Eggman. Shadow continued. One was the Guardians Unit of Nations, which is essentially all our world's military. The other was a small, but powerful, mercenary team known as the Diamond Cutters. Now that's a cool name. Nora grinned. We don't know the exact circumstances, but at one point, one of their members betrayed them and helped Eggman to wipe them out. Shadow went on. And you just met him. Mimic. Amy's eyes narrowed as everyone else had their own reactions to that revelation, be it either shock or anger. I already don't like him. Knuckles growled. He betrayed his own team. RWBY exclaimed. Why? Don't know. Rouge shrugged. Maybe blackmail or trying to save his own skin. We only found out about him in the first place after we got back and helped push Eggman back. What was left of GUN gave Team Dark the rundown. We were going to hunt the guy down ourselves but Eggman woke up Dark Gaia not long after. Tails recalled. Affirmative. Omega confirmed. The chaos unleashed from that incident was catastrophic. There were many civilian casualties. Even with the crisis abated, Mimic was never spotted. He was presumed deceased. It would seem that presumption was wrong. Ren pointed out. But if he's from your world, how did he get here to Remnant? Blake asked. He was probably on the Ark or one of Eggman's ships when we were transported here. Rouge assumed. Okay, so he's here now. John said. What exactly can this guy do besides shapeshift? He's a specialist at infiltration, as far as we've been told. Shadow answered. But in our encounter, I saw that while he was able to copy Ruby's physical appearance, he couldn't copy her abilities. He didn't have aura, and by extension, no semblance. So, if he were to copy my look, he couldn't use my speed. Sonic asked. Most likely. Shadow confirmed. So, we find this guy and shut him down. Yang stated, pounding her fist into her palm. But Mimic isn't our only problem. We still haven't figured out who's behind all these mutant Grimm. RWBY pointed out. Then perhaps it is time for my introduction. The group was instantly on alert, the Huntsman students having had their weapons drawn as they circled up, while Sonic and the others looked around for the source of the voice. Who said that? Weiss questioned. I don't see anybody. Kira looked around. Tails happened to pull out his personal scroll and saw that it had been activated remotely with an unknown caller on the other line. Our comms have been hacked. Actually, you helped me to do that. The voice revealed. The reception is always so bad all the way out here. I hope you're all enjoying your stay on the island. Aside from Mimic, you're the first visitors I've had in, well, you are among the first. What? Who are you? How'd you hack our phones? Sonic questioned. Shadow however narrowed his eyes as he had come to the conclusion faster than anybody else. Dr. Merlot, I presume. Yes. A pleasure to finally meet you, Sonic the Hedgehog, and friends. I've heard so much about you from our mutual colleague, Dr. Eggman. Merlot greeted in a seemingly polite tone. As for how I was able to access your communications, when you deactivated my radio towers, you also triggered a radio signal of my own design that would allow me to patch directly into whatever communications happen to be on my island. It's been so long since I've talked to another person, so I do apologize for the rudeness. He played us, Rouge said in a low growl, realizing that radio inference that kept them from communicating was also bait for Merlot to hack into their own communications. Merlot. He's supposed to be dead. Yang stated. Not quite, my dear. I won't bore you with details, but I was able to survive that little incident at Mountain Glen, such a tragedy. Merlot explained. Afterwards, I relocated here to continue to my experiments with the utmost of privacy. You're the one who's been experimenting with the Grimm. You made all those mutants. Knuckles pointed out. Yes, some of my finest work, wouldn't you agree? Merlot replied. Though I can't take all the credit. Some of the initial designs were based off mythological creatures from your world that Dr. Eggman had provided for me. Why are you experimenting with Grimm? That is madness, Weiss stated. I would be more than happy to explain this to all of you, but I would prefer to do it in person. So please, I invite you to join me at my main facility. Merlot offered. It is on the other side of the island, you can't miss it. I will leave the door unlocked. Farewell. With that, the call came to an end, leaving the group in a deathly silence. Omega. Shadow looked towards his robotic companion. With the radio interference cleared, I can detect a signal coming from the other side of the island. It is likely Merlot's main facility. The former Badnik reported. Can we trace the call, pick up his exact location? Amy asked Tails. Maybe with a little more time, but I think Merlot has control of the communications right now. The young fox replied. We really did play right into his hands. Blake looked towards Sonic who had a serious expression on his face. We're going to his facility, aren't we? Yep. The blue blur confirmed, even though it's obviously a trap. Weiss questioned. When isn't it? Sonic responded. What about Mimic? He's still out there, Yang pointed out. We'll just have to be extra careful. Pyrrha said. It may be best for all of us to stick together. Yeah, and if we get separated and run into him disguised as one of us, we'll ask him questions. John came up with an idea. Questions only we would know about. Come on everyone, Ruby declared as she cocked the rifle mode of Crescent Rose. We got some bad guys to catch. Meanwhile, Mimic walked through a long, underground, hallway as he pulled out a handheld device that shined to life to reveal Merlot in hologram form. They're on their way to the base now. Good to hear. So, you got everything ready, Doc? Mimic asked as he continued to walk. That last batch of mutants really gave them a challenge. Oh, most certainly. While that quartet of mutants were certainly powerful, I've devised quite the batch that'll be more than challenging for Sonic and his companions. Merlot replied. I can't wait to see these battles. Even if my mutants fail, it'll be worth it. I'll have more data to use to further improve my research. Mimic chuckled. You're pretty much the opposite of a sore loser. Speaking of, don't you think you were a bit reckless? Merlot asked. They know about you now and will be on guard. It'll be more difficult for a shapeshifter to surprise them if they know a shapeshifter is up and about. You've seen Eggman's reports on the hedgehogs, right? Mimic questioned somewhat irritably. Just one of them can take out a whole army and I got stuck with both. If I ended up with one of those brats, that'd be another story. But I'm not stupid enough to think I can take on Sonic or Shadow in a fair fight. I suppose that is a far point. Merlot replied. Mimic's grin returned as he came to the end of the hall. But don't worry. Even if they know about me, I can still get inside their heads. I'll let you and your experiments take care of Sonic and his buddies from my world, you leave the kids to me. At the end of the hall stood 5 androids that had think skeleton-like frames with their heads being blank spheres with no faces whatsoever. Mimic then looked to his right wrist where a watch-like device was located. He pressed a few buttons as the screen came on with a bright red text that read. Bioids online. Mimic biodata copied and transferred. Activating now. Thanks to some hard-light dust installed, the androids, known as Bioids, activated as a holographic light projection overshadowed all of them and they all bore an identical appearance to Mimic himself. It now appeared there were 6 Mimics in total. The true Mimic's grin only grew. I think it's time for RWBY and JNPR to learn a harsh lesson on reality. The younger and more inexperienced you are, the easier it is to get inside your head. And this at the end of part 9 this what if. Hope you guys like it. Do not forget to leave a comment down below and subscribe to the channel.